Hello, I'm Cody with Low Range Off-Road, and this is another how-to video. Today we are going to talk about inner tie rods, inner and outer tie rods on an 01 Toyota Tacoma, and that's the vehicle we are going to replace them on. Now this instructions will work on any Toyota Tacoma or 4Runner 96 through 04, but the procedure is a little different if you have a two-wheel drive, non-pre-runner, or the 5-lug. Okay, these are the tools that you're going to need. You'll need a torque wrench, a ratchet, a 24 and a 22 socket, some pliers, a flathead screwdriver, some dikes, a 27 and a 32 open-end wrench, a crescent wrench, some blue Loctite, a hammer, and a chisel or a punch, depending on what you want to use. And then we have this tool, and the dikes will work as well, to re-tighten the inner boot hose clamp. Okay. We are now going to go down to the vehicle and show you how to install the inner and outer tie rods. Okay, we are now under our vehicle, and this is what we're going to replace, is the inner tie rod, which is underneath this bellow. And this is the jam nut, and this is the outer tie rod, castle nut, and then our bellow clamps. And to first give you off a nice hint or a tip, if you leave your key in the ignition, you'll be able to move it free. And you got to move it all the way out in order to loosen your inner tie rod from the steering rack. But we're going to go back to center it to start off. And we're first going to start off by loosening the jam nut. In order to do that, you'll need a 27, and we are going to use a crescent wrench for the inner tie rod, and then you just go to loosen it. Now most of the time this jam nut seizes together and you probably won't be able to loosen it, so you probably have to just take them out all in one piece. But just back it off just a little bit, and then we're going to move to the castle nut. You first have to remove the cotter pin. It's kind of a good idea to keep it flat and level. And anytime you take one cotter pin out, make sure you replace it with a new one. We're now going to go ahead and remove that nut. Now that we have the castle nut off, we're going to nail it with a hammer until it comes free. Okay, now that it came out of the steering knuckle, we're then going to loosen this, and then you're going to want to count the turns as it comes out, so that way you get your alignment right, or close to. So I got about 21 and a half. Okay, next we're going to remove the bellow clamps, and then remove the bellow. So we're going to first remove the inner, and then you just pull on these two tabs here and here, and then release it out of that little groove there. And then pull it apart, and then remove it, and then twist the boot, and then remove the outer, Now a lot of the cases on this inner clamp, you won't be able to remove it without breaking it, so replace it. So now we're going to remove the boot entirely. Okay. And this right here is the inner tie rod, and then this is the rack here. So this is the part that went bad on our Tacoma, so this is what we're going to replace. So we're first going to remove these tabs. There's one here and one on the other side, and just get it back out of the way. Okay, we are now going to remove the inner tie rod. Once you break it loose, you could then usually just twist it off by hand. So the new inner tie rod comes with the new thrush washer, and it has little tabs on each side to hold it in place when you install it on the rack. And there's tabs top and bottom there as well. So when you go to install it, you're going to line it up and then just thread it in. But remember, you got to put blue Loctite on there so that way it doesn't back off. Just a little bit works. Okay, then we're now ready to reinstall. So I'm going to line that up, the tabs with the grooves in the rack. And then retighten. Okay, so we now have it tight. A little hint, if you have a hard time getting in there to stake this thrush washer, you can just turn the wheel and run it out a little bit. So that's what we're gonna do. So that way we now have easier access with the hammer in order to set it flat. So we're now gonna go ahead and do that. I'm going to do one on the other side. Okay, at this time we're going to reinstall the bellow, but you want to check your bellow first to see if it's in still good conditions without any cracks or anything. Because if it has cracks and you get water or dirt inside of there, you'll have to replace your whole rack. So we're going to slide it on. To right there, and then we're going to turn the wheels back to stretch this back over to here. And then just set it inside this groove. And then we're going to install the inner boot clamp. And since this is now just a little looser, we're going to use a tool to squeeze that back together and make it tight. Now if you don't have the proper tool, you can bend down one of the tabs or both the tabs and squeeze it together with some dikes. But we have the proper tool, so So we're just going to stick it in place here and then squeeze together. And that tightens that back down to where it doesn't spin and it'll hold your boot on. Okay, now for this outer boot clamp, you're going to want to push the boot back to where you can see this little groove. And then you want to set it just right on the outside of that groove. Or you use your clamp. And then your boot is back on the vehicle. We're now going to replace the outer tie rod, but as you can see it doesn't have a jam nut, so we are going to reuse the old one. Then you're going to want to kind of make a mental note about where the jam nut is on the old one and then where you're going to want it on the new one so your alignment is close. So we're now just going to unthread it. And then reinstall it onto the new one. Okay, so that's about where it was. And then when we go to rethread this into the inner, you're also going to want to remember we had 21 turns of unscrewing the old one out. So we're going to screw it in 21 turns and see if we're about at the same spot. A tip that you might want to do is to put some anti-seize on here, so that way the next time you try to go do an alignment, it won't seize together and it'll go a lot smoother for you. Okay, so we're just about right where we were at. So we're now going to take the castle nut off and then install the outer tie rod into the steering knuckle. Reinstalled the castle nut. Okay, we're now going to torque the nut. And another helpful hint, if you bring it all the way out, it makes it easier with your torque wrench in order to tighten it. Okay. And then something important is you're going to want to make sure the castle nut lines up with the hole in the inner tie rod. Push it back this way so you guys can see it. See the hole in the castle in the outer tie rod and then the castle nut. We're going to install the new cotter pin. Okay, ours doesn't quite line up, so we're going to keep on tightening it until it lines up. Not quite there. Just a little bit more. Okay. We're now going to install the cotter pin. Then we're going to use dikes again. And bend it back out, open it back up to where it won't come loose again. We have one more step left after we stick the cotter pin in. That's to tighten back down the jam nut back to the inner tie rod, so that way it doesn't come loose. And these don't have to be extremely tight, but you just want it tight enough to where it won't come loose. Okay. One more thing you may want to consider. We recommend painting any exposed metal to reduce the risk of rust. Okay, so we just finished the inner and outer tie rods on our Tacoma, and you're basically done. There's one more thing that's very important, is we recommend getting alignment done as soon as possible, so that way you will drive straight down the road and you won't wear out your tires. Once again, this is another how-to video with Low Range Off-Road, and thank you for joining us, and please join us for our next one.